No one shows up in your life and places a ticket in your hand to rise to the next level. There is no bell that rings, no one knocking on your door to say, now you're ready to rise. Every transformation begins not with permission from the outside, but with a decisive choice from within. You don't need to wait for someone to give you the green light. And if you keep waiting to feel ready, you'll spend your whole life in the preparation zone without ever truly beginning, because the feeling of being enough never actually arrives. You think that one day confidence will suddenly appear, that you'll wake up one morning bathed in light with clarity running through every cell of your body. But no, clarity doesn't come first. It comes after you take action, after you push through discomfort, confusion, hesitation, and all those whispers in your head telling you now's not the time. Growth is not the result of a pleasant coincidence. It doesn't happen when you sit still, take deep breaths, and wait for the universe to send down a perfect moment. Growth appears the moment you stand up while your body resists. When you open your mouth to speak the truth in a difficult conversation you've long avoided. When you step into places you've never been with a heart still pounding from fear, that's when you're upgrading. That's when you're truly alive. The truth is, most people love the idea of growth. They love the image of being stronger, more capable, more successful. But when it comes to walking the path that leads to that image, the one filled with early mornings, rejections, and long hours of silence without visible results, they stop. Not because they're weak, but because they believe discomfort is a sign something's wrong. They believe that if something makes them feel insecure, tired, or doubtful, it must be the wrong path. But the opposite is true. Discomfort is a sign you're reaching the edge of your old limits and beginning to expand them. It's not a sign to stop. It's a signal. Keep going. You're on the right track. How many times have you convinced yourself you're not good enough yet, that you need more time, that you should wait for a more perfect moment, and then you delayed, stepped back, avoided, but you know it deep down, that delay didn't keep you safe. It only pulled you further away from the powerful version of yourself you were born to become. Every time you obey the voice that says maybe tomorrow, you silently sign a verdict that keeps you trapped in a circle of limitation. You can't overcome something you keep avoiding. And you can't grow if you only do what's familiar. Change demands friction, and friction demands that you accept no longer being as comfortable as before. There's one thing I want you to remember. No one becomes extraordinary in their comfort zone. No one builds a career, a legacy, or changes their destiny by repeating comfortable habits every day. The people you admire, they didn't rise because someone granted permission. They pushed themselves. They stood up when no one was clapping. They worked when there was no audience. They started while still full of doubt. And they didn't wait for fear to disappear. They brought it with them and walked forward anyway. That's not recklessness. That's disciplined courage. That's how they transformed themselves. You could live your whole life in the waiting room, waiting until you're good enough, waiting until you have enough money, waiting until others believe in you. But the terrifying thing is people who wait often wait forever. Opportunity does not seek those who stay still. Readiness is not a feeling, it is an action. You don't need to do something massive. You just need to begin. Truly begin. And keep going through the uncertainty, the trembling, the envy, because every step, no matter how small, is pushing you out of your old self and toward a version of you with potential far beyond what you've ever imagined. No one grants permission, but you can always give yourself permission to begin. And you don't need anyone's approval but your own. The only thing missing is the first action you already know you need to take. No more waiting. No more bargaining. Stand up and begin from where you are. That's the moment you start to rise, not when someone hands you an opportunity, but when you push yourself to act and from there create the opportunity yourself. No one teaches you that discomfort is a sign you're on the right path. On the contrary, from a young age, you've been conditioned to respond reflexively. When you feel anxious, retreat. When you feel tired, rest. When you're afraid, turn back. But that very reflex has limited you, because discomfort isn't a danger signal. It's the most vivid evidence that you're touching a new layer of growth. Your body trembles, your mind doubts, your inner self resists, not because you're wrong, but because you're expanding boundaries that have long been familiar. And what kind of expansion comes without pain? Do you remember the first time you stepped on stage? You spoke what you believed in a room full of judgmental eyes. Your heart pounded, your palms were sweaty, your throat went dry. But then you spoke. And after you spoke, something shifted. Not outside, but within you. A new belief was formed. A belief that you could do difficult things even if you'd never done them before. That belief didn't come from theory, but from acting through discomfort. In that very moment, you became larger than yourself. Discomfort is a kind of language, but unlike clear spoken words, it speaks through emotions, through feelings of uncertainty, through the questions that rise in your head. Am I good enough? What if I fail? What will they think of me? These questions aren't meant to stop you, but to reveal a truth. You are standing at the edge of your comfort zone, and on the other side is the life you haven't yet lived. If you retreat, you return to the old version of yourself. If you move forward, you rewrite who you are. Most people misinterpret these signals. They think uncertainty means wrong. They assume anxiety means danger. But no, those feelings are simply signs that you're stepping beyond the familiar. Just like in physical training, you don't grow when your body feels at ease. You only develop muscle when it's challenged, pushed to its limits, stretched, and then rebuilt stronger. The mind is no different. No new folds of thought are formed by doing what you already know. There must be tension for rebirth to occur. I'm not saying you should immerse yourself in suffering. I'm telling you something that very few have the courage to live by. That every feeling urging you to retreat might actually be an invitation to advance. Not every fear is a sign to stop. Sometimes fear is the light that shows the way. When you're about to send an important email, when you're about to make a phone call that could change your career, when you're standing in front of a life-altering decision, if you feel no anxiety at all, maybe you're not truly stepping out of the familiar. You've been programmed to seek certainty, but that very instinct is what holds you back, because real life only happens in the uncertain, in the place where you're not sure you'll succeed, in the place where there are no guaranteed outcomes, in the place where you enter with courage, not with certainty. And that is precisely why most people stop. They confuse comfort with safety. They choose temporary ease and pay with missed opportunities they'll never get back. But you're not like them. You're listening because you know there's a layer of potential within you that hasn't been unlocked. You've felt it every time you avoided a difficult decision, every time you asked yourself, what if I had dared back then? That question doesn't go away because it's the truest part of you, urging you to become someone greater. And every time you reject discomfort, you're also rejecting the stronger version of yourself. It's not easy to do the hard thing when your mind is screaming to return to safety. But you don't need to silence your fear. You just need to act alongside it. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to keep going despite fear. And when you manage to do that even once, you begin to redefine what normal means in your mind. What once made you tremble will become your habit. What once felt overwhelming will become your new starting point. That is the upgrade. It doesn't come from theory, but from real world experience. Discomfort is the whisper of your untapped potential. If you're sensitive enough to hear it and brave enough to respond, you'll discover every time your heart races, every time you feel confused, every time you hesitate, it's a chance to expand who you are. And the reward isn't just the result you achieve, but the person you become in the process. So the next time you feel discomfort, don't step back. Don't ask, how do I get rid of the fear? Ask instead, what's waiting for me on the other side of this fear? Because right in the middle of anxiety, in the heart of embarrassment, in the center of self-doubt, That's where you begin to live a life no longer dictated by your past. That's where you rise, not because someone granted you permission, but because you've finally decided to own yourself. Freedom is not doing whatever you want whenever you feel like it. True freedom is the ability to control yourself even in the moments when you feel no interest at all. If you only act when emotions allow, then the one in control isn't you, it's your emotions. And emotions are always fluctuating, unstable, unfaithful. They get you excited to start, then leave you stranded midway. They give you a surge of energy, then vanish without warning. Basing your life on emotion is a guaranteed recipe for stagnation. You think freedom means not being forced, not following a schedule, not having to do anything unless you want to, but try living like that for a while and you'll find yourself slipping into chaos. Everything becomes half done, every plan gets delayed, and you begin living reactively instead of proactively. Discipline is not a chain, it's a framework. It doesn't restrict you, it liberates you. Because when you have discipline, you don't need to wait for inspiration to begin. You work even when your mind resists. You wake up on time even after a short night's sleep. You write without the perfect idea. You make the difficult call even while afraid. And it's that consistency in action that gives you the feeling of ownership, not because you always have clarity, but because you keep moving forward even without it. That is strength. I don't know how many times you've felt disappointed in yourself. You set a goal, then let it drift away. You promise to change, then delay. You think you need more motivation, more time, just a little more. But what you're lacking isn't enthusiasm. What you're lacking is commitment, the ability to do what needs to be done even when no one reminds you, no one sees you, no one claps for you. When you live by emotion, you live like a leaf. The wind blows one way, you drift that way. But when you live by discipline, you are the root. Even when the ground shakes, you remain steady and grounded. The irony is that most people hate discipline because they think it makes life rigid, but it's the lack of discipline that exhausts them. They constantly wrestle with the question of what should I do? When should I do it? Should I even start? And their energy is drained by the endless inner negotiations. Meanwhile, a disciplined person doesn't bargain with themselves every morning. They've already decided. They don't wait for the right feeling. They just need a clear goal to submit to. And in that simplicity lies a profound relief. No need to overthink, just begin. Discipline is also where confidence begins. No one becomes confident just because they read a good quote or listened to an inspiring podcast. Confidence comes from keeping promises to yourself. You say you'll do it, then you do it. Even when tired, even when busy, even when no one notices. And with each promise kept, you rewrite your self-definition. You're no longer someone who tries, you are someone who executes. No longer just a dreamer. You are a builder. And that new identity, forged through discipline, changes how you walk through life. I know there are days when you don't want to do anything at all. Mornings when the bed feels like the sweetest trap. Nights when you'd rather scroll aimlessly on social media than finish your pending tasks. But it's precisely in those moments when no one's watching, no one's pushing, you have the chance to train your inner power. When you rise to act despite not wanting to, you send a strong signal to your mind. I'm the one in charge, not my emotions. And when that signal is sent, often enough, it becomes an inner conviction. It becomes the root of resilience. Freedom doesn't lie in doing what's easy. It lies in choosing to do what's hard without being pulled back. Disciplined people don't act because they're never tired. They act because they've chosen a standard higher than emotion. They don't trap themselves in loops of excuses and procrastination. They can rest without spiraling. They can change plans without losing direction. Discipline gives them structure, and within that structure, creativity is unleashed, energy is focused, and goals become reality. If you're looking for a breakthrough, don't start with inspiration, start with commitment. Choose one thing you will do, no matter what, and then do it every day. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be a lot. It just has to be consistent, because that consistency is what separates the mature from the impulsive. You don't need to always feel motivated. You just need enough discipline to act when motivation is absent. And then you'll see freedom isn't flying everywhere without a map. Freedom is knowing exactly where you're going, and nothing can stop you from getting there. You're not lazy. You're not lacking passion. You're not short on inspiration. What you're lacking is commitment to action. Because if success only required motivation, everyone would have reached the top long ago. Motivation is just a passing wind. It can arrive unexpectedly through a video, a book, or a fiery speech. But the next morning, when the alarm goes off, when your body still feels heavy and your work hasn't changed, you realize that feeling has disappeared. And if you only act when motivation shows up, you're placing your destiny in something more fragile and fleeting than a summer drizzle. Commitment is what remains after motivation leaves. Commitment is what keeps you aligned with your original plan when your emotions are doing everything they can to pull you away. It doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need to sparkle. It only asks that you keep your word to yourself. So many people believe they're not ready to start because they don't feel inspired enough. But inspiration isn't a prerequisite. It's a result of action. The more you do, the more motivation you have. The more you begin, the clearer the path becomes. On the other hand, the longer you wait for inspiration, the deeper you freeze in uncertainty. The people you admire aren't always bursting with energy. They too have mornings of fatigue, days they want to give up, moments of deep self-doubt. But one thing sets them apart. They act regardless of how they feel. They don't negotiate with themselves every day about whether or not to act. They made the decision beforehand, and they live by that decision without waiting for any external signal. And it's that simplicity of thinking that helps them go further than anyone stuck in the loop of waiting for inspiration. You've set goals before. You've written them on paper, stuck them on the wall, even made them your phone's wallpaper. But a few days go by and your excitement fades. You think, I need to watch another video to get inspired again. But the truth is, you don't need more information. You don't need more advice. You just need to act. Do the smallest item on that list. Do it even if you're unsure. Do it even when the outcome is unclear. Because within action lies a kind of magic that thought alone can never create: momentum. I've seen many people more talented than me burn out halfway simply because they didn't act long enough. They started with brilliance, then faded into silence, not because they lacked ability, but because they relied too heavily on motivation. Meanwhile, those who endure over time always have one thing in common: an action system independent of emotion. They don't ask, do I feel like doing this today? They ask, what did I commit to? And then they act as if there's no other option. That simplicity makes them resilient, because when you act without needing motivation, you become dangerous. You're no longer at the mercy of emotional weather. You become a self-operating system. Commitment means you don't give yourself an escape route. It means keeping your word even when no one's watching. It means setting a new standard and not allowing yourself to fall beneath it ever again. From the moment you make a real decision, everything around you begins to change, not because the world becomes easier, but because you're no longer shaken by obstacles the way you used to be. You become someone who can be trusted, not just in the eyes of others, but in your own. You don't have to do everything perfectly. You just have to do it consistently. Action creates progress. Progress builds belief. And belief creates real motivation, the kind that's no longer tied to emotion, but built on living evidence that you are on the right path. Each time you choose to follow through on what you promised, even a tiny task, you're building a new layer to the powerful identity within you. Conversely, each time you break a promise to yourself, you puncture the belief in your own capabilities. You don't need to wait for another perfect moment. You don't need to feel right. You don't need to be completely ready. If you're still waiting for emotion to arrive before acting, you'll stay stuck in a refined loop of procrastination. Motivation is not the starting point. Action is. Commitment is the choice you make before results appear. And when you're brave enough to hold that choice in silence, in exhaustion, in the days when no one's watching, that's when you begin laying the foundation for a life you truly own. You are not lacking inspiration. You just need to stop depending on it and begin living as if there is no other option but to carry out what you've already decided. That's how you turn dreams into plans, plans into actions, and actions into results, not through luck, not through emotional highs, but through commitment, repeated day after day. That's what makes the difference. That's what makes you. Your brain doesn't care about your dreams, your goals, or your potential. It's not programmed to help you become extraordinary. It has only one function: to keep you safe. And safe doesn't mean truly safe. It means familiar, predictable, low risk. To maintain that sensation, it constantly whispers lies into your ear, sounding reasonable, but in reality, a string of subtle limitations. You're tired, just take today off. You're not good enough to do that yet. It's not the right time. Wait a little longer. Sound familiar? That's not the truth. That's your brain's default protection system, an outdated one. You're not lazy. You're not weak. You're simply being controlled by an ancient mechanism created in the time of our ancestors. Back then, stepping out of your comfort zone meant risking predators, starvation, immediate danger. So the brain learned to react. Don't change. Stay where it's safe. Better the known than the unknown. But times have changed. You're no longer living in the jungle. Today's risks don't mean life or death. They're opportunities for evolution. The problem is your brain is still running the old software. It still confuses growth with danger. And you believe it. How many times have you felt fired up at night only to wake up the next morning dragged down by a series of seemingly logical reasons? You set a goal, then rationalize your retreat. You want to act, then convince yourself that today isn't the right time. That's not the truth. That's a story told so many times you no longer recognize it as a lie. And the scariest part is these lies don't shout, they whisper very softly, very cleverly, very reasonably, and very destructively. Your brain doesn't care whether you live up to your potential. It only cares whether you feel comfortable. Every time you try to change a habit, enter a new field, challenge a limit, it immediately sends out warning signals, not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're stepping outside the familiar. And to the brain, familiarity equals survival. Everything else gets labeled dangerous. It will use fear, doubt, fatigue, procrastination to turn you back, not because you're incapable, but because it's trying to protect you from the unfamiliar. And do you know what makes this system so powerful? Repetition. Every time you obey that voice, you're not just delaying an action, you're reinforcing a neural pathway. You're making it stronger. You're creating a reflex. Every time fear shows up, you retreat. And the more you do this, the more it becomes identity. You're no longer just someone who procrastinates. You begin to define yourself as undisciplined, easily discouraged, indecisive. But all those labels are assigned by a fearful brain controlling a human full of potential. And you can break this loop by doing the opposite. Every time you act while your brain says stop, you're rewriting neural pathways. You're carving a new road inside your mind. At first, it's hard. It pulls you back toward the old habit. But if you stay consistent, act regularly with no negotiation, no bargaining, you'll begin to notice something strange. What once scared you now feels normal. What once was your threshold now becomes your new starting line. Remember, fear is not a sign that you should stop. Sometimes it's proof that you're doing something meaningful. Mental resistance isn't a blockade. It's a signal you're entering unexplored territory. And that territory is exactly where you grow. Stop listening to that voice. Stop letting it steer your life. Know that it's just one part of the system, not your entire being. You have reason, you have the ability to observe your own thoughts. And right here, right now, you can make a choice to let your brain continue running on old instincts or to take control with awareness. Every time you hear, it's too late, you're going to fail, they'll laugh at you, don't respond by instinct. Pause, observe, and ask against it. Act because there is fear, not in spite of it. The difference between those who truly rise and the rest of the crowd isn't about capability. It's that they know. The brain will always try to pull you back, but they don't let it decide. They don't wait for fear to vanish. They walk with it. And through that very action, they weaken it. Like darkness being driven away, not by shouting, but by the small flame of a candle. You don't need to set the world on fire. You just need to light a single action, even when the voice in your head tells you to wait, because what you're hearing is not the truth. It's the old program, and you, right in this moment, can be the one to rewrite it. Not through debate, but through your next step. You're not burnt out because you're doing too much. You're burnt out because you're no longer being challenged. Because every day you repeat the same tasks in the same life loop with the same thoughts, nothing new to awaken the spirit within you. It's not your body that's tired. It's your mind that's withering. You're not lacking energy. You're lacking an inner drive that's activated by a goal big enough, bold enough, challenging enough to make you feel truly alive. And if you're honest with yourself, you'll realize what's making you tired isn't too much to do. It's too little that's truly worth doing. Every morning you wake up and look at your schedule, not out of excitement, but out of obligation. You get out of bed not to conquer, but to continue a familiar sequence. To the outside world, you might seem fine. You do enough. You're not failing, but deep down, you know. You stopped playing big a long time ago. You're living at a level that's just enough to avoid criticism, enough to not fall behind, enough to say you have something to do, but enough to survive is worlds apart from living up to the magnitude of who you could become. You're not weak. You've just forgotten what it feels like to touch something that gives you goosebumps. Forgotten what it feels like to do something that makes your heart race from fear and excitement at the same time. Forgotten what it feels like to break through a limit you once thought was impossible. Those feelings are the fuel of real life. And when they disappear, you start to mistake your state for exhaustion. But the truth is, you're just being drained by a life that asks nothing of you. There's nothing triggering your potential, so the inner power has no reason to be released. The times you felt most energized weren't when you were resting. They were when you were doing something beyond your comfort zone. When you started a project you'd never done before. When you learned a new skill. When you chased a goal so bold, others shook their heads in disbelief. That's when you felt awake, alive, on fire, not because you rested more, but because you were challenged at the right level. Your body doesn't need more sleep. Your mind needs a reason to rise. And that reason isn't found in the familiar. You're playing too small. So small that you don't need to give your all, don't need to be creative, don't need to hit your ceiling. And it's this smallness that's making you tired. When you don't need to grow, you start to shrink, not because you're stepping backward, but because you've stopped stepping forward. The feeling of stagnation doesn't come from failure. It comes from repeating the same thing, from repeating yourself. You need a goal that when you speak it aloud, makes your heart pound, because you know that if you achieve it, you will never be the same again. You need a mission so compelling, it won't let you sit still. Look at your schedule. What percentage of it truly forces you to rise? How much of it is automatic, passive, and maintenance-based? If you're tired from merely maintaining, it's time to redesign. You can't reclaim your energy in tasks that are too familiar. Energy comes from expansion. from facing something you've never done before, never thought you were strong enough to do, but chose to begin anyway. That's when your brain wakes up, your heart ignites, and your vitality returns. The fatigue you're feeling doesn't need another day off. It needs you to step into a new level of play. A zone where there are no guarantees, but the rewards are real. Where there's no clear path, but a calling you can't ignore. It could be a job that demands more of you, a project you've been avoiding, a goal that once scared you. Let yourself be awakened by the very things you've been postponing, because inside those things, your energy is waiting to be activated. Don't confuse rest with retreat. Don't call stagnation peace, and don't fool yourself into thinking you're fine when deep down there's a voice repeating, you are capable of more. That's not pressure. That's truth. You know it's real. And you also know if you don't do something different, you will continue declining quietly, not through a crash, but through prolonged compromise, a silent surrender the world will never notice, but you will always feel. So if you're feeling tired, ask yourself, at what level am I living? If the answer is beneath my potential, then you've found your answer. You don't need to search further. You don't need more motivation. You just need one decision. Raise the standard. Start with one small action outside your comfort zone, a challenge you know will make you bigger once you've overcome it. And each time you choose to do the harder thing, you're not just regaining energy, you're reclaiming yourself, the version of you that's bolder, broader, and more alive than you ever thought was real. Pretty good is the sweetest trap because it doesn't hurt, it doesn't scare you, and it doesn't force you to change. It reassures you that you're still on the right track, still have a job, still living decently, still achieving just enough to not feel like a failure. But precisely because you're not failing, you're also not pushed to break through. You stop somewhere in the middle where everything feels sufficient. And it's that very sufficiency that silently kills your potential without a sound, not through collapse, but through prolonged compromise, little by little. You look around and see that you're not doing worse than others. In fact, you're doing better than many. You're stable. You're safe. You're not in crisis. And you tell yourself this is good enough. But do you know what's scarier than failure? It's when you start calling a life lived beneath your potential a success. When you lull yourself to sleep with standards lower than the ones you once dreamed of. When you forget what it feels like to long for something greater simply because you've grown used to living quietly. Pretty good doesn't push you off a cliff. It holds you halfway up the hill. It doesn't cause enough pain to force change, but also doesn't offer enough joy to make you feel truly alive. It lets you exist without the sensation of moving forward, and you start to think maybe this is just what life is. But deep down you know. It's not, because every time you're alone in silence, every time the noise fades, there's a small question that sneaks in. Is this really all there is? And if you have to ask, then the answer is already clear. It's not. The trap of pretty good is that it offers comfort. And comfort is one of the most addictive things. It doesn't just make you resistant to change. It makes you forget what you used to want. It leads you to downsize your dreams to match your current energy levels. Instead of lifting yourself to the level of your aspirations, you lower your aspirations to match what you're willing to exert. You begin to call laziness balance, avoidance contentment, and stagnation stability. But giving it a new name doesn't change what it is. You're compromising, even if you won't admit it. Those who live fully don't settle for pretty good. They don't let themselves remain in the neutral zone just because it's low risk. They understand that to live without expanding your limits is to impoverish yourself. They don't wait for shocks to change. They create challenges, set higher goals, not because they're lacking, but because they want to grow. They don't need external pressure because they refuse to make peace with mediocrity, even when mediocrity feels pleasant. And that difference doesn't come from talent, but from the standards they set for themselves. If you feel like your life is just drifting, if time is passing but you're not really moving forward, if each day drains your energy without leaving behind a clear result, Don't blame your circumstances. Take a look. What standards are you living by? Have you unconsciously chosen pretty good as your destination because it's less painful, less frightening, less judged? And if the answer is yes, then what you need isn't rest, it's awakening from a comfort that slowly drains your vitality. I'm not saying you should throw away everything you have. I'm simply inviting you to examine the difference between enough to live and a life worth living. You can be in a safe relationship but feel no emotion. You can have a stable job but no motivation. You can maintain your health at an acceptable level but no longer feel alive in your body. And none of these things will knock you down. They'll simply make you fade. Day by day, you exist in a quiet blur to the point where you forget how brightly you once dreamed. You weren't born to live a just enough life. Inside you are layers of potential that have never been unleashed, not because you're not capable, but because you've never required yourself to rise. But you can do it at any time, right now. You don't need a dramatic event. You just need to ask the question, what if I stop accepting pretty good? And the first small action after that question, that's your breakthrough step. Every time you choose to do something above your old standard, you're lifting one brick from the wall of your limitations. You're stepping back onto the runway of growth that you once abandoned simply because things felt good enough. Don't let comfort make you forget how fiercely you once wanted to live. Don't let applause from others stop your progress. Don't let just enough results make you forget how incredible it feels to break through your own limits. You didn't come here to stay in the safe zone. You came here to grow. And any day you choose to reject the trap of pretty good is the day you begin to return to the most magnificent part of yourself, the part that was born to soar far beyond the life you're currently living. Every time you procrastinate, you're not just postponing an action. You're silently rewriting your identity. And what's dangerous is that this process happens quietly, unseen, unmentioned, but it embeds itself deeply into your subconscious. You say, I'll do it tomorrow, and it seems harmless. You say, I'm waiting for the right time, and it sounds reasonable, but each of those statements is molding a version of you, not the dreamer, not the person with potential, but the one who always stands on the sidelines, always waits, always avoids the pressure of starting. Procrastination doesn't just steal your time, it steals your trust. Every time you know what needs to be done but still don't do it, you send a message to your subconscious, I'm not trustworthy. At first you don't notice it, but the more it repeats, the more disconnected you feel from yourself. You lose excitement about planning because deep down you know you'll break it again. You stop getting excited about big goals because you've grown too familiar with the feeling of giving up. And when betraying yourself becomes a habit, you start living smaller just to avoid disappointment. The scariest thing isn't that you're not doing anything. It's that you start to believe you're the kind of person who can't do it. You say, I'm not a disciplined person. I always quit halfway. I lack motivation, as if it were the truth. But that's not the truth. That's an identity formed through repeated procrastination. You weren't born indecisive. You became that way because you allowed yourself to retreat so many times and no one pushed back. No one reminded you. No one reset the expectations. And so you began to lower your own expectations too. Procrastination sounds gentle, as if you're just postponing something until you feel more ready. But the truth is, no one ever feels more ready just by waiting. Only action creates readiness. Only starting brings clarity. And only by pushing through internal resistance can you restore the belief, I am someone who keeps their word. Procrastination doesn't let you rest. It keeps you suspended in a half state of wanting to move forward and being pulled back. And in the end, you're exhausted by the tug of war. You could progress rapidly if you acted every time you needed to instead of negotiating with yourself. But because you constantly bargain just for today, just this once, you don't just lose an opportunity, you lose momentum. And with that, you're no longer the driver of your life. You're ruled by emotion, hijacked by subtle laziness, and you begin living as if there will always be time to come back later. But you and I both know there is no always. Every delay is a step backward. Every day without action is another confirmation of a false identity. Someone who knows but doesn't do. Your identity is not fixed. It is shaped through repeated choices. And the choice you make today is the first brick in the person you will become in 3 months, 6 months, or 3 years. If you want to be someone decisive, someone who takes action, someone trustworthy, there are no shortcuts. You must do what you said you would do when it's easy, and especially when it's hard. You must act when no one's clapping, when there's no guarantee of success, and when the voice in your head is still whispering, just wait a little longer. It's easy to believe that with more time you'll do better, but the truth is what you need isn't more time, it's a firmer decision, a clear, non-negotiable commitment. Whether I feel like it or not, I will do this. And then you follow through. It doesn't need to be big, it doesn't need to be impressive, it just needs to be consistent. One small action each day, taken precisely when your brain is trying to pull you back. That's when you're rewriting your identity. Not through affirmations, but through tangible evidence, the things you do, even when you don't feel like it. You cannot wait for the right feeling to act. You must act so the right feeling follows. And when you do that long enough, the phrases, I procrastinate, I lack commitment, will no longer be true. You won't need to prove it with words. You'll become someone whose behavior speaks for itself, and there is nothing more powerful than a person who lives in alignment with their word, even in small, quiet, but relentless ways. If you feel stuck in the loop of procrastination, don't try to break free with motivation. Start with a small action. Done today. Rewrite a plan. Make that phone call. Turn off that app that's distracting you. Do the one thing you promised yourself long ago but still haven't done. And most importantly, don't wait another round. Every time you choose do it now, you erase one more imprint of the false identity you've carried from the past. And step by step, you reclaim ownership of yourself, not through theory, but through what you do today. Success doesn't wait for you to be ready. It doesn't wait for you to have all the skills, the confidence, or the ideal circumstances. Success comes to those who dare to act, even when they're not perfect, not ready, and still trembling. The people you admire didn't begin with an optimal plan. They started with a first draft, awkward, flawed, full of gaps. But they had the courage to begin. And that courage made all the difference. Not because they were sure they'd succeed, but because they understood waiting for perfection is the trap that kills every beginning. You've spent hours thinking through plans. You've written lists of goals, read dozens of books, watched every inspirational video. But what you're missing isn't in the material. It's in the first action you haven't taken. Because no one becomes confident by thinking. Confidence doesn't come from learning more. It comes from daring to begin, even when you don't fully understand. You don't need to be perfect to start. You need a real step, even if it's messy, uncertain, and unrecognized. I know you want everything to be ready. I know you fear starting wrong, fear failing, fear being judged, but fear is not a reason to stop. It's proof that you're doing something important. Every form of growth begins in awkwardness. Every great skill once started in clumsiness. Every major success began with steps taken in uncertainty. The difference is this: those who dare to act without being sure will always go further than those who endlessly polish, organize, and wait to be ready. You don't need another round of better preparation. You need a round of begin anyway. The truth is, the more you think, the more you'll feel unprepared. The more you prepare, the more you'll be seduced by the illusion of not good enough. That's the subtle trap of perfectionism. You think you're progressing, but in fact, you're delaying under the disguise of refining. Preparation doesn't create power unless it leads to action. A beautiful plan on paper has no value if you don't live it out day by day. A big dream carries no weight if it only lives in your mind and is never tested in the real world. You don't need a perfect solution, you need a decision. And the first action after that decision is the anchor that pulls you out of the cycle of repetition. Don't wait until your fear disappears. Acting while fear is still present, that's real strength. And when you act, something strange happens. Fear decreases, clarity increases. You won't see the whole path until you start walking. But as you move, the steps will begin to reveal themselves. Progress doesn't come from certainty. It comes from the courage to take calculated risks. Every great result is built from small, imperfect actions. A poorly written page is the first step to a great book. An awkward phone call is the foundation of a professional relationship. A poorly lit video is the starting point of a future inspirational channel. Success is never beautiful at the beginning. It's rough, unclear, and often unrecognizable from the end result. But that roughness is essential. You cannot reach greatness if you're unwilling to endure the awkwardness that comes first. You're not stuck because you lack time. You're stuck because you're waiting for the right moment. But timing doesn't come from the outside. It's created by your action. You can turn today into your starting point. You can turn your first clumsy step into a launch pad for consistency. You don't need to be perfect to begin, but you do need to begin in order to become better. Every small step is a brick in the identity you're trying to build. The difference between those who succeed and those who don't isn't in preparation. It's in reflex. One acts without certainty, the other keeps thinking. The one who acts, even if they're wrong, still learns something. The one who waits forever gathers reasons to keep waiting. And the longer you wait, the thinner your belief becomes, the louder your self-doubt gets, the stronger your fear takes over. You can't reason your way out of fear. You can only act through it with one small step. Not perfect, just real. So if you've been waiting for a sign to begin, this is it. You don't need anything else. No one is coming to pull you out of stagnation. No one can hand you the confidence you're looking for. Only you, with your decision to begin, with all the messiness and unpreparedness, that's enough. Because you don't need to be your best self to step forward, but you do need to step forward to become your best self. And when you dare to take imperfect action, you're living in your true power. No more waiting, no more reasoning, just action. And that's what creates every result worth being proud of. You don't need to do something grand to begin building a life you're proud of. You just need to begin with one small, steady step each day. And it's those quiet, unremarkable small steps that are truly the most durable bricks in the foundation of who you're becoming. They won't make you stand out in a crowd, won't earn you applause, but they are the most silent, the most important, the most reliable parts of real transformation. It's not a giant leap that brings the breakthrough. It's the relentless repetition of simple actions done so consistently that nothing can shake them. You may have once thought that to change your life, you had to do something extraordinary, but the most resilient, strongest, and most successful people didn't start with something different. They started with consistency. A person who writes a short passage every day ends up with a book after a year. Someone who trains just 10 minutes every morning will have a new body in a few months. A person who spends an hour each night learning a new skill may step into an entirely new field after a year. No action is too small if you perform it as part of your identity. And no great result comes from steps that aren't repeated. You often underestimate the power of just doing it. You believe actions are only worthwhile when you have long hours, a perfect plan, or immediate results. But you don't realize that every result you've ever dreamed of is built from a chain of tiny, dull, unremarkable actions. And because you keep skipping over those small first steps, you remain at the starting line, always feeling unprepared to begin. But the truth is, if you do it consistently, every small thing becomes something big. Life doesn't ask if you've made a plan. It only looks to see if you're moving. And every time you take action, even the smallest step, you make a declaration, I am someone who is building. No one else may see the process, but you see it, and you begin to feel something rarely talked about, a sense of control. Not control over the world, but control over yourself. That is the deepest power you can possess. And it only comes when you act consistently without needing excitement, without needing perfection. I know you've started things and given up, and that may make you doubt your ability to commit. But you don't need to prove anything with words anymore. You just need to choose one simple action. Start over and repeat until you're no longer someone who's trying, but someone who has become. A person who writes every morning is no longer trying to become a writer. They are a writer. A person who trains every evening is no longer trying to live healthy. They are a healthy person. Identity doesn't come from one-time resolve. It comes from keeping promises to yourself through small, repeated actions. You are building your life. Every step you take is either laying down another brick or delaying a piece of your future. And the strange, beautiful truth is you can start rebuilding anytime. You don't need to wait for New Year's. You don't need to wait for Monday. You just need to do something different today. You don't need speed, just consistency. You don't need to do a lot, just do what matters. Small consistency will always beat occasional intensity because consistency creates identity. And identity is what keeps you going even when no one is watching, when there's no applause, when the spotlight is gone. If you've been living through a series of blurry, uninspired days, ask yourself, what brick did I lay today? If you have no answer, don't blame life for not changing. No one builds a house by circling the land. You have to place the first brick. And when you do, you'll feel something deep without needing anyone's validation. You're creating something real, not just words, not just intentions, but reality. Maybe small, but real, maybe simple, but strong. And the truly beautiful thing is if you place another brick tomorrow and another the day after, you'll eventually have a foundation that nothing can shake. Don't be dazzled by grand achievements. They don't come from one dramatic burst. They're built by those who lay a brick each day, even in silence, even when no one sees. You can be that person. You just need to choose one action and begin. Don't ask, is it worth it? Because if it moves you forward, it's always worth it. And if you do it long enough, you'll realize you don't need giant leaps to completely change your life. You can do it through small steps as long as they're intentional. Those steps won't just take you far. They'll also make you someone you trust. And there is no greater success than that.